Welcome to Cybersecurity Where You Are, the Center for Internet Security's podcast. I'm Sean Atkinson, CISO at CIS.
And I'm Tony Sager, Senior Vice President and Chief Evangelist at CIS. Cybersecurity affects us all, whether we're online at home, managing a company, supporting clients, or running a state or local government.
So join us on Wednesdays as we discuss trends and threats, explore security best practices, and interview experts in the industry.
Together, we'll clarify these issues, creating confidence in the connected world. Welcome back to the Center for Internet Security's podcast, Cybersecurity Where You Are, where we take a look at some important topics and try to bring a little clarity to this confusing world of cybersecurity. And we have a great topic today. It's one of the things that we have all wrestled with for decades in computer security and cybersecurity: password policies. We all love them. We love to argue about them, debate them, calculate them. But at the end of the day, folks like us are responsible for trying to give best advice to the community. So I've got an extraordinary couple of guests here today. First, let me introduce Phyllis Lee, who's the Director of Security Content here at the Center for Internet Security. Phyllis, welcome to the show, and please give the audience just a little bit of background about what you're all about.
Yeah, sure. Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Phyllis Lee. I'm the head of content development here at Center for Internet Security. So that means the CIS critical security controls, our CIS benchmarks, our secure configuration guides, as well as our cloud team fall underneath me. And so, as you know, in security best practices, we push out guidance and guidance on password policy and things like that. And prior to working here, I spent 25 years at the National Security Agency. And what really surprised me when I came here is how when we say something and write it down on a piece of paper, organizations follow it and do it. I mean, it's pretty amazing. It's pretty powerful. So, we take what we do seriously. We take what we write down on a piece of paper seriously. And so something like password policy, I think, is important because, people will listen to our guidance. And, we always look towards NIST also to see, what their guidance is.
Great stuff, Phyllis, and welcome to the show. And second guest for this episode is Julie Haney of NIST. Julie, welcome aboard, and please give the audience a little bit about your background also.
Thanks, Tony. Happy to be here. So I do work at NIST. I lead the human-centered cybersecurity program there, where we look at all things related to the human element of security. And I think we're going to go into a little more about what that means during the course of the podcast. Background, originally computer science, also worked for the National Security Agency with Phyllis and Tony, and did vulnerability assessments, wrote a lot of security guidance that has hung on over the years, and became very interested in kind of all the human factors and the non-technical reasons why organizations were really struggling to adopt security mitigations. And so went back to grad school to study human-centered computing and ended up at NIST, actually being able to do that full time. So that's me. Thanks for having me.
Oh, pleasure. And yeah, two distinguished practitioners and longtime colleagues and friends in this business. So Julie, you hinted about it. How about sharing with the audience a little bit about human-centered security as a topic? Because until you started grad school and interviewed me, I had never heard the topic before.
Yeah. So as you both probably know, cybersecurity is a very technology-dominated field. But when we kind of take a step back and think about it, people are really at the center of it. So cybersecurity technologies are designed by people. They're circumvented by people. They're really for human benefit. And so it makes sense that we put people at the forefront so that we try to make security work for people and not the other way around. So my view of, and at NIST, our view of human-centered cybersecurity really is looking at all of the things that make us human, our limitations, our behaviors, our abilities, and considering those and addressing those in cybersecurity technologies and processes and policies. So really, we want to aim toward enhancing people's cybersecurity performance and their experiences while still maintaining those good security outcomes. So a piece of that is usability. So you may hear the term usable security, and actually our team used to be called that up until a couple of years ago. So looking at whether or not people can, accomplish their security tasks with effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction. But it's beyond usability because we're looking more broadly at people's perceptions of security, their attitudes, their motivations. So all of those kind of non-technical factors that ultimately impact people's cybersecurity experiences.
Yeah, that's a pretty big undertaking there to think through all that. Not a take it or leave it or do as the technologists tell us to do. So, Phyllis, let me turn to you though. You talked about following NIST guidance. Can you walk us through the relationship, right? So we count on NIST as the national authority on a lot of these kinds of topics, and our goal at the Center for Internet Security is to both rationalize, simplify, prioritize, and be prescriptive about practices. At the same time, recognizing there's a sort of broader view of the system issues and all that. So, can you walk us through kind of how you, as a team leader developing content at CIS, would be looking at NIST guidance and how it factors into the decisions that you lead?
Yeah, sure. So when we create content in security best practices, we have our guiding principles, by the way, which was written by our own Tony Sager several years ago. And so these are longstanding, tried and true, very relevant guiding principles. And one of them is really around not creating confusion in the community. Talk about human factors is, well, if NIST says one thing, then another government or maybe a foreign government, another standards body, another organization who's well respected says another. It's really hard for organizations to decide, well, whose guidance do I follow? Right. And so, number one, we never want to cause confusion in the community. We always want to be aligned with organizations like NIST, who are authoritative sources, who in the US, executive orders point towards NIST to execute things on behalf of the US government, as well as OMB, so on and so forth. So we always look to NIST to say, what is it that they're saying? Even how is it that they're defining terms, right? If there's confusion, glossary of terms, we look to NIST as the standard. And so it's always our goal to be in line with partners or organizations like NIST and other standards bodies.
Yeah, thanks for the nod for the guiding principles, by the way. But one of the first ones I wrote down, I don't know if you follow my Substack stuff, Julie, but it was written to hand to Paul Bartok. And the essence of it was the community in agreement and us, NSA at the time, 80% happy is more powerful than the community not in agreement and us 100% happy. And I knew for a fact, no one at NSA is ever 100% happy with any security thing. So why would we aim for that, right?
Right.
So, but this idea of critical mass of agreement to minimize confusion. Do I trust this agency more than that? That has wasted more time in this industry than I could imagine.
And with that, we'll be right back after this quick break.
Most organizations want to streamline their cybersecurity and compliance efforts.
It's just not always easy to do so on your own.
That's where a CIS Secure Suite membership can help.
It provides benefits, tools, and resources designed to help you implement the CIS critical security controls and CIS benchmarks.
Secure Suite can help you strengthen your cyber defenses, comply with common standards, and cybersecurity frameworks, all while saving you time, money, and effort.
Apply for membership today by visiting cisecurity.org.
Start secure and stay secure with CIS Secure Suite. Thank you, and let's jump back into the episode.
Julie, can you give me, so password policies was a topic of the day. So give me the human-centered security person's view of password policies, and how do they impact human behavior? How are they impacted by it? What interaction does it have with human beings?
So I maybe I want to look at it from both sides. So there's kind of some positive repercussions or positive consequences, and then there's some negative things. So talking more about kind of our traditional password policies, when we think of like a lot of complexity, having to change your password every 90 days, not being able to reuse passwords, all of that. So from a positive perspective, I think the institution of those complex password rules decades ago now, right, really kind of raised the gravitas of passwords and authentication, right? It really made people recognize like, oh, like this is something that I have to think about or that needs to be protected. And so maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is not the greatest password, or password is not the greatest password. So I think it kind of made people recognize that this is something of value. So then from the negative side, which is where I kind of come in with my human-centered outlook now, is that it creates a lot of burden on users. So especially as, over the years, the number of accounts that we have to access online sites and different services is really growing. I think I saw something crazy like the average person has like between 100 and 200 different online accounts and passwords. Now, we don't use all of those, fortunately, on a regular basis. We tend to use a small number of them. But, just the sheer management of those, if we were to do that manually, and many people still do that manually, a lot of people still are not using things like password managers. I mean, that's just an extraordinary burden on people. It just really kind of stresses them. It's just cognitive overload in a lot of ways. So, having to, come up with new passwords, these complexities, people sometimes don't understand what the password policy means. Sometimes they're not worded very well. Our team did a study a number of years ago where people really weren't sure what special characters were or what was encompassed in special characters. We always have to have a special character. People don't necessarily know what that means. Think about nowadays, we do a lot of our online activity from a mobile phone where we have a very small keyboard, and it just frustrates me to no end, and I'm not very good at it, and having to switch to to use a special character to type in a password. So all of these things become very frustrating for people. They're not getting onto a computing device to do security. They have some purpose in mind. They have some tasks they want to accomplish, and so all these things get in the way of them being able to accomplish their primary tasks. So they become very frustrated, and they often resort to less secure workarounds. So that's really the crux of it: is that this kind of just this overload that people are experiencing, they have to cope with it somehow. So what do? They reuse their passwords across accounts, which we know is a huge issue. They pick passwords that are easy to remember. They tend to cycle through things or have patterns like, oh, okay, you want me to change my password? Instead of having a 1 at the end, I'll have a 2. They write them down, which there's debate about whether or not that's okay. Or they put them in, I've seen people with a note on their phone with all of their passwords in clear text. So seems like a good idea from a security perspective, but is it really such a great idea if it causes people to do things that are much less secure and make them more vulnerable?
Yeah, I used to say, still say, because I say the same things over and over again, when you make security too cumbersome or expensive, then your users become your attackers. And it's not because they're not bad people, but they have a job to do, right? That is not solely about security. So if you tell them they can't bring, well, we're all old enough to remember when things like thumb drive became a verb, right? I'm going to thumb drive around your perimeter because you won't let me move large photograph files in and out of whatever, or Dropbox became a verb where I'm going to Dropbox you the data. Now you take it out of the visibility of IT, you've lost control of information. And so so part of this, I'm sure this human-centered thinking about this, right, is looking at that and factoring that into our defenses. Do I encourage bad behavior? Do I make things worse? Am I better off encouraging or providing a capability that I can live with, which might not be optimal, if the alternative is something that's out of my visibility and out of my control? And those are all legit questions. And I think that
I really love what you said about that with the phones and all of that, because that is annoying.
Oh,
when I try to go to
Isn't it a generational thing?
Yeah,
I think
can't
so.
do it
My young adult daughters who are in their 20s make fun of me constantly about how slow. Sometimes they're just like, here, give me your phone. Tell me what you want to type.
That's right.
So I have
That's right.
actually, when I share a funny story about passwords and all of that. So when I was at the NSA and I was giving guidance, and I was still in my ivory tower, a young, excited
We've all been there.
security person in the lab, and I was working on what was at that time future combat systems. But it was like, oh my gosh, why are you sharing your password in the tank? You cannot do this. This is horrible. And the military person said to me, well, there's one person who gets access, and that's the officer. If that person gets killed and I need access to important data, where mines are, where friendly forces are, where unfriendly forces are you saying that I don't get access to that data because, I can't have that password? And I said, no, I do not. I do not want to be the one who says you can't have access to that data because this person was killed in combat. And so, it is, that's an extreme example, of course, but it is definitely an example of you really need to think about, like, Julie, like your that human factor in the situation, right? Is it appropriate for me to sit in a lab and mandate some pristine policy? That's just unrealistic, and literally, as we used to like to say, lives are at stake. But for sure, like in that instance, it's like, and again, if I wrote that down, then they'd have to follow that policy.
Well, the difference, there, I think what you're seeing is working to two different security objectives, right? This sort of confidentiality, protection of information, tight control over it, is at odds with the on-site real life need for resilience. Say, that I don't know if they thought of it that way, but the access to the data sort of overrides, this Phyllis Lee's pristine, concern about passwords and so forth. But so you could take the perspective, right? I've encouraged bad behavior, but you could also say, actually, they're just operating to a different security model here. Resilience really matters when you're in a life and death situation. Julie, you must have another example of how a well-intended security policy in general has led to worse behavior. Anything besides passwords that you?
Yeah. I mean, actually, I keep thinking, because this is just such an amazing, it's a simplistic example and maybe not high stakes, but a few years ago, it was in an IEEE newsletter, someone wrote in and they were really proud of themselves because they came up with this, like, quote unquote solution to a problem they'd been having at work. And what it was is it was a guy that worked as a scientist in an organization with a lot of other scientists and researchers. And the organization had just instituted a screen lock. So after 5 minutes of inactivity,
Yes.
right? Like, like us security people are
Great.
like, yes, you need to do this. You need to do this.
Exactly.
If you step away, then someone can't hop on and access your computer. So the screen lock, though, the problem is that a lot of people in the organization, because they were researchers, they were reading papers, they would print papers out, and they'd be at their desk, and they'd be reading these papers, and the screen kept locking. And they would have to keep re-authenticating, like, many, many times throughout the day. And so this reader who wrote in said that he just got really frustrated, but he devised a solution to all of it. So he, it was one of these, optical, he had an optical mouse. So he basically got a watch with a second hand that would move, and he mounted it under the mouse so that it would always detect motion.
Sure.
And it would never lock. He didn't have to worry about it. It would never lock.
Very
so
good.
He would step.
That's awesome.
And so he was so proud of this solution. He told his coworkers, and then they started doing it. And he just, he was just presenting this as, like, look how I got around this. And the moral of the story is, when you're enacting a security policy, first of all, one size doesn't fit all for every organization. So you really have to consider the context of, the people in your organization. How are they going to be impacted? What's the type of work they do? What's their workflow? How is this, new security mechanism or policy, how might that interrupt their workflow? And is it going to force them to these less secure workarounds? And so again, it's like not necessarily a high stakes environment, but it was just so such a great example of what happens when you don't consider that human element.
No, that's perfect. The earliest version of that story I heard was, of course, only engineers could come up with this thing, right? They had the whole screen lock thing. And so we went down to the basement and had the engineers come up with a mechanical version of the bobbing bird. So it would just peck at the space bar while he was going to the men's room, and keep it alive for a while because he was so irritated.
Even better.
But he came up with a rationale for it, and it was actually true. And if I said the name Bruce, I bet both of you would smile because it was him telling the story. Hey, wait a minute! For someone to get to he worked in a private office where the screen faced away from the door. He had a office administrator who was the guardian of the door, and had to come through the workspace where a stranger would be challenged. He said so he made his own security policy on the fly, right? Which I considered all those factors and decided it was a terrible idea. So he came up with his version of the, bobbing bird thing that would peck away at the keyboard. And now, of course, you can buy toys like that will do the same thing. But that's a wonderful example, Julie, of this sort of, what kind of makes sense in abstraction, right? Separate from real life, or what is the physical context or the operational imperative that, like the example Phyllis gave, can lead you to areas. And what that does then is it undermines, I'll say, security, the importance of it, the relevancy of it, right? The attention that people will pay to it. And so you really have, you have these unintended side effects, right? You're sort of undoing a security culture but by saying, oh, the security people are just in my way. Their job is to be the enforcer. They're the hammers. They're not here to help me get my job done, which is, of course, the opposite of what we'd like to think. All right, so Phyllis, here's a quiz for you. So you don't have to lead us to the conclusion, but I'm interested in the process of how of the discussion within CIS about password recommendations and how you would look at NIST, the recent guidance, or the relatively new guidance from NIST, and how that discussion goes internally. And again, you don't have to lead us through all the gory details, but a sense of what did different people care about, and what were the kind of arguments or points that were raised during that discussion.
Right, sure. So, when NIST updated the -63, and it was different guidance down to, 8 characters good enough as long as it's truly random, and so on and so forth. And there were some bounds around it. And if you read the appendix, it really was around because of the human factor, right? And so I posted it in the news group. I had someone lead a whole discussion on it. We had, a virtual meeting because we're all remote. And of course, there are a lot of concerns about the quote unquote security of it, right? And so it just seemed unheard of to decrease the number of characters in a password versus increase, or even say, oh, why not a passphrase? Like, I think everyone has in their brain, we're like, okay, 14 to 16. And really the guidance is around how to make that 14 or 16 better, not how to minimize, how decreasing that makes it better. But what are the tricks? What are the tools that I can use to make that, 14 to 16 character password more robust, more easily to memorize, and things like that. So a lot of the discussion was around, well, the decrease means less security, right? And that's really what it was focused on. And that really, you talk about the human factors with like trying to, in your mind, think about, well, you've lessened the security. When all along, like I said, all our guidance has been focused on how to make that 14, 16.
Yeah, so mentally, we trained everyone, right, to think of computational complexity, let's say, as security. Right? That is equivalent, longer, more variety equals more complexity, or therefore more security. But again, that the point that I think we discussed with Julie was that's a pretty narrow view of what does security mean, right? But I think some of the audience will smile because having witnessed and been part of some of these discussions that Phyllis led, the emotion that people attach to their positions is off the charts. It's an area that people are passionate about. And again, literally pulling out calculators to look at entropy, or how could we ever go back, right? Those kinds of arguments. But I think it speaks to the challenge of getting this common context. How do we look at this in a way that balances different views of security, or the real life versus the theoretical, the practical, the behavioral changes. And this is a particularly interesting area because it's accessible, right? We can all understand it well enough to have an opinion, and yet it's one of the hardest to get a common opinion on.
The one thing that I really liked what NIST did is in the appendix, they said, we've done the studies and 16-character passwords don't increase entropy, right? And like everyone's ingoing position is more better is more better.
Yeah, I think that is, again, NIST is a great place for that kind of discussion, because you've got the mathematical horsepower, the computing, as well as the professional advice giving role, right? You have to, at their level of abstraction, NIST has to try and juggle all that. And I think that was a real eye-opening example. And when it first came out, I mean, and we were still tied to enough folks at NSA who are equally passionate on both sides of that issue to take us to interesting places and to care a lot about it. But at the end of the day, as Phyllis stated, the perspective of CIS is the community is better served by a level of agreement than it is by engaging in the endless debate society that cybersecurity has been for most of my life. So, Julie, I want you to take a different direction for you, because I sort of collect these headlines where the studies say that human beings are the cause of 80% of cyber breaches, or the human factor was the essential, blah, blah, blah. And there are always these really high numbers, right? And there's an implication that humans are the problem. And if that's the case, then humans must be the solution. We got to train the heck out of them, make them more aware, or whatever you have to do. So give us the human-centered security view of those headlines. How would you react to those?
Yeah, so it's actually interesting because some of those numbers have actually gone down, like the last year or two. So some of the kind of the big names that put out their, yearly reports have started, I guess, accounting for what they call the human element a little differently. So a few years ago, they were including anything that involved human activity. So whether that was kind of something accidental, people falling for social engineering or making errors, mistakes, what have you. But they were also including kind of malicious insiders. Okay, so because they're humans, they're people as well. So people that were like doing credential abuse, that they had privilege access, and they were using that in ways they shouldn't, and so on. More recently, some of the accounting has now dropped kind of the malicious aspect of it from the human element. So they're counting it differently. So the numbers we used to see were like 80%, 70-something percent. Now they're more around 60%. But I mean, that's still substantial. I mean, that's still quite a lot. So those are, again, like social engineering, making errors, misconfigurations, those types of things. So I think what it tells us is that we need to do better and stop giving the human element lip service, because I feel like we're doing that right now. So I had a very interesting conversation actually a few weeks ago with a cybersecurity vendor. Was at RSA talking to a lot of security executives, and they all admitted that, yeah, like we see these human element, these big numbers, and we know we have to do something about it, but we're not exactly sure what to do, and we don't know if what we're doing is actually effective or not. So we just do like security awareness training, right? That's it. That's the human element. We're done. And I'm not trying to dump on security awareness training, because I think that it definitely has its place and it's necessary if it's done right. But it's often not done right. So what we see is this over reliance on the security awareness training, which we know is like often like once a year, pretty boring, stale. And we're putting all of the onus on these employees that they're going to retain everything that was in that training, even though it's only once a year, that they're going to totally understand it, they're going to see how they fit in it, and they're going to always make the right decision. So we're putting all of the burden on people again. Instead of, I think we need to start shifting our mindset to, first of all, make this all more engaging for people, show that it's relevant to them, communicate the why. I mean, we hear that all the time as a lot of organizations are struggling with people that say, well, I'm just a chemist, or I'm just an office admin. Cybersecurity is not my job. So how do we change that mindset? And how do we relieve a lot of the burden on people? So kind of getting back to what we're talking about with password policies, increasing usability. We have a saying in our group that we want to make things easy for people to make the right decision, hard to make the wrong decision, and easy to recover if the wrong thing happens. So how do we kind of get back more to that? Instead of just throwing security awareness training? And then how do we actually measure what we're doing? I mean, we're just throwing money, at the problem, and we don't even know if it's working. So how do we actually find measures of effectiveness that are meaningful, not just, 100% of my workforce took the training, because that doesn't tell you anything.
Yeah, I think that the approach that and I think in the nature of the work that you're doing in this part of your career, Julie, is sort of natural systems thinking. Right, so we don't solve the human problem, if that's the way to characterize it, independent of the technology problem. Right, so to make it hard for a human to do a bad thing and easy for them to do the right thing, really, I think implies that you have to design your system that way. Right, the technology, the process, the workflow has to be done. So, when you see those crazy numbers, you say, well, you could say, well, gosh, bad human beings, 80%, 60% of the time. Or you could say, who is the maniac that designed a system that a frontline human being can bring down, right, with one keystroke? What does that say about our technical architecture? Well, it says that we didn't bring those together in the way you suggest, right? The systems thinking about it is what's been missing, because we often, I think, have built most of our systems. Well, we don't really build systems very often. We compose them from pieces, right? We throw a lot of pieces at them and kind of hope for the best without a measurement. So I think that's part of it. I think that's really key, is that, yeah, we don't want to think of this as the magic cure to the singular problem of human beings, but we also want to, kind of examine the way these decisions are made, how the bad things happen. And there is a feedback loop here. And to have a feedback loop, you have to have a measurement that says, I don't want to just make them aware. We're not going to awareness our way to greatness, right? We're going to say, what should we really care about? What's the priority? And I know Phyllis spends a lot of time thinking about this. Not all controls are equal either. So you can't just throw lists of controls at people. You have to help them, deal with their limited budget, with their limited management attention span, and so forth.
Can I ask Julie a question?
Oh, please.
So, what you struck me when is like, people need to know the why. And I've heard that a lot. And, we're working with an external colleague who I think he's great on a different project. And even as far as like trying to create secure software, in the paper he wrote is really about a culture of security. And so that kind of was going through my mind when you said that. And I wanted to know your thoughts, really sincerely, as we look for security best practice guidance. Like, what do you think about a culture of security, and how do you create that? Like, what, I mean, it doesn't seem really like a best practice. It is a best practice, but it's not like I can write a document and say, hey, this is how you create a culture of security. We loosely say, well, you need a culture of security, and it starts at the top. Senior executives need buy-in, the board needs buy-in, and make that security awareness training. It's got to be interesting. So we say these things, but like, practically speaking, I'm wondering, like, Julie, you and your group, like, what have you thought about with that, and what could we do to be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, we all know that organizational culture change is never fast or easy, and I think, I mean, yes, it starts from the top, it goes down. But it is, a piece of it is making sure that everyone sees themselves in cybersecurity. They see that they have a responsibility. I think a lot of it is that people have to feel psychologically safe within an organization. So that's a term that I've been hearing more in cybersecurity. They have to feel that they can report something or they can ask a question without fear of blowback from that, like if they make a mistake. So that, this is something, security is something that we can discuss openly and admit to being confused about or uncertain about. And that their opinion matters or their feedback matters. So a lot of times it's kind of like, again, like the security people from on high are putting forth these edicts and we must follow them, and they're not really taking into consideration like how this is going to impact me. And so I think when the security people start to elicit that kind of, or solicit that feedback from people, like, hey, like where, like, okay, we notice, we're having some security issues in the organization with this, going to the people and kind of getting at the why, the root cause. So, are you struggling with something? Is it a communication issue? Is it a training issue? Is it a usability issue? Do you just not realize that you should be doing this? Do you just not have the skills to be able to do this? And then, having an open door policy where people can say, hey, I noticed this new policy, I'm having problems with it. And actually like taking their feedback seriously and acting on it. So it's like that, it's that two-way communication where the security folks aren't in their ivory tower, that they're actually trying to get that input from the workforce. And so then people feel like they're a part of the solution, right? So we hear a lot, and Tony, you alluded to this, we hear a lot about, users are the weakest link, right? We hear that all the time. And we try to, and we do everything we can to try to constrain people so that they don't make errors, right? Instead of also recognizing that as humans, there's some things that we're really good at that computers aren't as good at. So how do we leverage a human strengths as well? How do we give people the tools? How do we empower them so that they feel like they are actively involved in cybersecurity, that they're important to cybersecurity, that their experiences matter? I think that goes a long way. So it's kind of building that loyalty. And then there's been studies about, if you feel bad about the organization you work with, you're going to be less likely to, go out of the way to do anything security related. So how do we kind of build that trust within the organization, the two-way communication?
Yeah, it's a lot packed in there, Julie. And I think, but you're right. The seeing security, right, is something that's essential to the business, and the security structure, the people, right, are there to enable the business to operate, but safely, right, in a way that preserves the value of the company and so forth. And getting past this, and we all remember the early days, right, of blue teaming and red teaming. Oh my gosh, there's an operational vulnerability in a DoD system. We couldn't possibly let anyone else in the world know because it's so sensitive. Well, we were part of the recognition that, well, if one system has it, there's probably 10,000 systems. Right? We need to tell people, and it's not embarrassment, it's about empowerment. No, this is a weakness that is going to be pervasive across a big population. And therefore we need to handle it at a systemic level and not blame the victim with the, every bad thing that happens. So a fascinating topic. We might have to bring you back sometime here, Julie, to talk about some of these other human-centered activities, because I think it is fascinating, and it also represents, again, this natural level of systems thinking that we struggle to get a handle on. But as we wind down our time, Phyllis, any last thought you'd care to leave with the audience, or any last point that we missed during the course of this that we can come back to another time?
No, I think, what struck me as Julie was just talking is it's true. We put so many policies in place to help prevent users from making mistakes, but sometimes it comes off as we don't trust our users. And that never feels good at the end. So it really is kind of striking that balance. And I'm like very happy to talk with you, Julie, about this topic, just because, we often say, oh, usability and security are in conflict with each other. But it really, is like you're working towards making them work together. So I really appreciate that.
I think I heard a not very subtle pitch there, Julie, to get you involved in helping us think about our
Well, I was going to say that later,
how to incorporate your work. Gotcha.
And I'm going to make Julie help us.
Sorry, I broke the veil here. Oh, well, very good. All right. And for you, Julie, any last thought you'd care to leave with the audience here before we shut down and then Phyllis makes a shameless pitch to have you join her team?
Yeah, I think it can be very intimidating for organizations to kind of start to think about the human element because, they don't know what to do beyond security awareness training. They don't necessarily have a human factors expert, which I highly recommend if they can hire someone to come in and look at their organization from that perspective. But it really, to start with, it really gets down to looking at some of the security issues that you have within your organization and look for the human touch points. Like, where are the frictions there? There's a lot of data that we have. We have user generated incidents. We have IT help desk data. All of that can kind of give us a signal that something's not right, that there might be an issue, and then going to get that root cause. So talking to your users, doing surveys, anonymous surveys, focus groups, those type of things. So it could be just something as simple as starting to look at where are we struggling, where's the human touch point, and all of that.
Gotcha. Okay, we'll find those points and see if we can remove some friction and get some work done while we do so securely. So thank you both. It's been this is a topic I know will resonate with the audience and one that we've all grappled with for the entire history of computer security. So I think deserves some attention to sort through usability, security. How does it fit within this larger context of the systems design and systems operation? It's just essential to the work that we do here at the Center for Internet Security. Julie, we thank you for taking time to join us here and bring your insight to this. For the audience, Julie's legit. She worked in this area for a long time and decided to turn her skills in a different direction here later in her career. And so we appreciate that she brings credibility as one of our blue team testers back from the fourth also.
And I unfortunately wrote some of that security guidance that
one of the windows
25 plus years ago. So I'm reformed now.
You're just bringing your wizened perspective here with the experience of decades.
Yep.
And Phyllis, thank you as always for joining us here. To the audience, thank you for being part of the group here. We always appreciate your time and attention. As usual, subscribe to us in the normal ways, Cybersecurity Where You Are, and always open to your suggestions for topics and other guests that we can bring on board. And with that, thank you. Catch you next time. Thank you for listening to the podcast today.
The thoughts and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are solely theirs and do not necessarily reflect those of CIS.
Tune in on Wednesdays for a new episode. And in the meantime, visit our website at cisecurity.org.
Together, we'll continue our efforts of creating confidence in the connected world.